When we think of history's greatest warriors, most of us imagine kings. When we think of history's greatest warriors, most of us imagine kings, emperors, generals, men on horseback leading armies and battles. But what if I told you that one of the most remarkable acts of resistance in history was led by a woman in her 60s? Not a queen ruling an empire, not a military commander, a grandmother, a queen mother. A woman who simply reached a point where surrender became impossible. And for our first story, we begin in the Ashanti Kingdom, modern day Ghana, with a woman named Yaa Asantewaa. And trust me, this story is far bigger than a war. It's a story about identity, courage, and what happens where an empire demands the soul of a nation. Before we talk about Yaa Asantewaa, we need to understand the world she lived in, the Ashanti Kingdom. The Ashanti Kingdom was one of the most powerful states in West Africa. It was rich in gold, organized, prosperous, feared by its rivals. But what fascinated me most wasn't its wealth. It was something called the Golden Stool. To outsiders, it looked like a golden throne. But here is what most people don't know. The Ashantis believed the Golden Stool carried the spirits of their entire nation. It represented the living, the dead, and generations yet to come. No king was allowed to sit on it, not because it lacked value, but because it was considered sacred. And this is where the story becomes more interesting. Because empires often understand wealth, they understand territories, they understand power. But what they don't always understand is the meaning. By the late 1800s, the British has already exiled the Ashanti king, Pampe I, and several leaders from the kingdom. The empire believed the Ashanti spirit had been broken. The British governor, Frederick Hudson, made a demand. He wanted the Golden Stool, not just to sit on it, not just to possess it. History often remembers this as a political dispute. What history rarely mentions is that for the Ashanti people, this felt like a spiritual humiliation. The chiefs met in secret. Some wanted to give in. Some believed resistance was hopeless. Fear had entered the room. And honestly, I think that's one of the most human moments in this entire story. Because courage is easy to admire from a distance. It's much harder when you are the one who had to pay the price. Then Yaa Asantewaa stood up. By this point, she was already respected as a queen mother, known for her wisdom, leadership, and courage. She looked around the room and saw something she couldn't accept: silence. And what she said next would echo through history. If you, the men of Ashanti, will not fight, then we, the women, will. The more I study history, the more I realize that leadership often begins in moments exactly like this. Not when people feel confident, not when history is guaranteed, but when someone decides fear will not make the decision for them. This is the part most people miss. Yaa Asantewaa didn't become famous because she won. She became unforgettable because she stood up with everyone else sat down. The Ashanti rose. Thousands joined the resistance. The British found themselves trapped inside Kumasi for months. Yaa Asantewaa's forces fought against one of the most powerful empires on earth. And for a moment, it seemed impossible. But greatness often comes at a price. British reinforcements eventually arrived. The resistance was crushed. Yaa Asantewaa was captured and exiled to Seychelles, far from home, far from the people she fought for. And that's the part of history I think about most. Not the battle, not the sacrifice. Because history often celebrates courage. What history rarely mentions is the loneliness that sometimes follows it. The British won the war. At least, that's what the history book says. But here is what most people don't know. The British never found the Golden Stool, the sacred symbol they demanded, the object that started the conflict. The soul of the Ashanti nation is survived. And that changes everything, because suddenly this is no longer a story about defeat. It is a story about preservation. The Ashanti lost territory, but they protected identity. And sometimes that matters more. Yaa Asantewaa died in exile in 1921. But long after the British Empire faded, her story remained, because some legacies refused to disappear, and that is why this story still matters. Not because she conquered an empire, but because she remained her people who they were. This was episode 1 of Queens of the Word. And next time, we travel north to another extraordinary woman, a queen who built an empire with a sword. Her name was Queen Amina, and trust me, her story is just as incredible. Until then, remember, the stories you know are only half the story. The truth is still waiting to be discovered. Subscribe to any Echoes of Legacy, like and share for more. See you in my next video. Bye.